Welcome to the series. In this video, we're going to focus on the UI UX part of the flagging functionality. For example, whatever is making this happen and how I'm managing the status of this button from being disabled or not using IndexedDB, etc. So let's just first start here. Let's see what it looks like, which is the button right here. And as you can see, there are a whole bunch of data attributes that I dynamically assign: data key, data list ID, and flag email. And this is the email I'm going to be using to send out the email to the list owner. And this is the one I'm already collecting from here and attaching to this button so that later on I can collect it and send email to the list owner. Let's have a quick look at the backend HTML to see how these are being collected. Let's look into the category.php. Okay, so when we come to category.php, we see that the rest of it, the content part of it, is coming from template parts content-category, which is right here. Basically, it's under this template part folder and content-category. So let's look into that file. And once we dig down to that flag button level, this is how it is being generated. The data key, I'm actually just creating a unique key data for that specific post by adding flag dash the post ID. And I can use this function because these are all inside that category loop, which is creating this category based list here. And then also I'm creating another attribute with list ID, which is also the post ID, and the author's email I'm actually collecting using this get field function, which is an ACF function, and the ACF field ID, because this is all coming from advanced custom field or ACF. Now let's go back. Now let's track down the JavaScript that's causing this modal to launch. Let's go back to the code. Okay, as previously mentioned, that this is the centralized script where I bring in all my modules and instantiate them. So for the flagging functionality, these are the two JavaScript modules that are responsible. One is the UI UX handler, the other one is the Ajax handler. So let's focus on this one first. Let's track this down. Let's go under modules and selfless flag, and here is the module. Here at the very beginning, I am importing jQuery and the IDV keyval. This is the library I'm using to interact with IndexedDB. Just to give you a quick overview, let's go to the documentation. This is the IDB keyval npm module. You can just come here, and installation is very simple, and this is a very little library, but very handy. Use npm to install and then import. You can actually get specific functions like I'm doing here in my project, get and set, which actually makes it even smaller. And if you want to know the details of how to use them, you can always consult this GitHub page for that library. Go down. This is get and set in detail. Now let's get back to the UI UX code that we were discussing. Okay, so we are back at the flag list button UI. Besides the IDB keyval, I'm also importing Bootstrap here so that I can use the modal functionality. Now let's move on to the constructor. Here are some global variables that I'm going to need, and collecting some elements, basically the flag button, the modal, and the text area, which are the flag list button, the modal, and the text area. Next, I'm calling two functions. One is set events and the other one is flag status. Now first, let's focus on the set events one. That will actually help us explain better when we do come back to the flag status. So let's go check it out. So pretty much this is setting a click event on the flag list button, and this is the function that will handle it. Flag status is here, but we'll come back to it later. Now let's focus on this function right here. Okay, so at the first look, we can see that we are using the event attribute and collecting those global variables, filling them up with the data from the data attribute from that button, like we saw here. These guys, the data key, data list ID, and the flag email. Also, if we go back, we'll see that this button is not really one button. We're collecting a group of buttons using the class, right? So when we say this.flagList button, we mean all the list buttons, right? So in that case, to isolate everything, we had to use the event.target. So now that we have our data, what we do with it, we create an object where we put the list ID or the post ID and collected email, and this is something I just created, the disable item, and giving it a false status. Now with this object, for the first time, I am calling the set function from the index.db. At this point, I have to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the button, and here are all the data attributes that we converted that into an object. Now let's go in there, application, and we find index.db, the keyval store, and this is going to be our store right here. So watch what happens when I click on the button. Right? Immediately there's an extra data available. So if we refresh and we find, even if we cancel it, it's going to still be there. But let's go look into what that contains. Just as promised, the disable false, the email, and the list ID. So no matter what, each button, anytime they got clicked and canceled out, it doesn't even matter, because the status will not change unless the form is submitted. So let's refresh again. We find another one which contains another set of data with the disable attribute to false, so that this status data can be used by the browser to make sure whether to keep this button enabled or disable it. Now let's go back. So we just saw what this function just did. Now let's focus on this bootstrap function. Basically, we're calling in this modal and invoking the modal function, so that once the button is clicked, the modal opens up. And this is something I'm doing so that no matter what was previously in that text area, it's going to clean it up. And after all those, at this point, I'm just adding a new data key, data attribute to the flag insert form, which is basically the one that drops down, this form right here. I'm just attaching a key to this one. If we just go here and let's see if we inspect it, and here it is. This is the form, and I'm just attaching this new attribute with the flag key so that we can use this during our Ajax functionality when this button will be clicked. This will all get cleared up through the next few videos, so don't worry too much right now. Now let's go back, and this time we will look into this function right here, the flag status. Basically what's happening here is that every time the page is refreshed, this function goes out there and loops through every single flag button and access the IndexedDB. Basically, this time it's going to go ahead and try to get the data. For example, right here, it's going to go through and collect all these keys, thus these objects, and go through them to check for this status, whether it's false or true. If this ends up being true, it's going to go ahead and disable this button. Let's go back. It is cycling through every single button. Then it's calling the database to go through all the keys, and if they are found, then it's matching the specific list ID and making sure that this data.disable is true or not. Once again, checking for this data.disable, false or true. So if it does find that it's true, then it goes ahead and adds the disable class to it, turning that into a disable button. And that's about it for the UI UX part of the flagging series. Next, we'll cover the data validation part of it.